inherited, I don't know from whom.
We did a great job, not only for me personally or for our institute, but for all participants, on sharpening our views what we may call social vulnerability. I would not say that we are living with a consensus definition, but we have to realize that this whole concept of vulnerability to approach this problem, extreme events or unexpected changes in nature, in the environment, their social, economic and human effects and reflection is an extremely interesting approach, and this fuzzy concept or fuzzy in between what we may call vulnerability is a core issue we do not know really well.
Okay, I have a couple of questions I want to ask you.
Yeah, hold it. Yeah. Oops. Yes, yes. Okay, ask away. Yes.
Okay, in terms of social vulnerability, what do you hope for this week in terms of the evolution of some of the students' perspectives here?
Well, I'm hoping in terms of the application of methods and theories to understand and cope with social vulnerability from this week, for the students, that a number of them will join me here in the jungle, where the duck and I have set up a camp for their further training of organic intellectuals in the Gramscian sense, who will join with the mass of toiling people, women and men, and possibly be successful in lobbying for some really serious structural reform.
In terms of social vulnerability.
When I was doing my PhD, which is on smallholder coping strategies to drought in central and eastern Kenya, actually 15 years after Ben was doing, 10 years after Ben was doing his PhD, and I used some of his data to do a panel survey, although it was poorly matched with the clusters that I had. But I got done, and we had the same supervisor, Bob Cates, and I refused to give Bob any of my dissertation till it was all done. So I had it all written up, nice binder, gave it to him. He said, well, it's okay, but you haven't talked about vulnerability. And I'd been in Kenya for 4 years doing this, and I hadn't really heard the word. And I thought, what do you mean? He said, well, you know, think about vulnerability. You know the hazards literature. How do you map vulnerability? So I added a chapter on vulnerability, which I thought was kind of artificial, sort of like, I'm just making this up, aren't I? And then we had, just after that, a project with the US Famine Early Warning System, and they were trying to redesign their vulnerability assessment, and they asked us for advice. And that really got me started, confronted with reality. How do you represent food security as part of a vulnerability paradigm? How do you get these field enumerators to take on some of these issues in interesting ways? So it was mostly an accident, yeah.
Thank you.
Great.
We suddenly found that through a network, sort of informal network, that a whole lot of us, young, 20-something field workers, were discovering really awful human suffering that seemed to us avoidable and inexplicable if governments were really doing what governments were supposed to do. There were people we knew who were working in the Sahel during the famine. These French I mentioned the other day, Claude Meassou, Jean Copin, for instance. There was a guy who worked in Honduras and was there for Hurricane Fifi in the San Pedro Sula Valley. I mentioned this before, I think, in the course of our conversation around the big table. And I'd seen the same thing in Kenya. And we also knew people who had worked in Bangladesh and had actually worked the huge cyclone in 1970 where, for instance, by misfortune, the cyclone came during the harvest season when enormous numbers of landless laborers were sleeping wrapped up basically in their cloths in the fields on these very low-lying islands called shores in the Bay of Bengal. These are they're about, a meter above sea level. They were just wiped out. I mean, nobody really knows how many people died in that cyclone, but I mean, the estimates go up as high as 600,000-700,000 people. And we were kind of in a position, because of our location kind of in UK and in Europe and so forth, to begin to kind of harvest all this experience. It was still kind of on a networking basis, and we began to say sort of, and so anyway, some of us wrote a background, a sort of occasional paper at Bradford University, and published in '75, I think. Interestingly enough, we weren't yet using the word vulnerability. I think we used the word proneness at that time. But by the next year, we had gotten a hold of some public health literature and development studies literature, and when we published finally this article in Nature, I believe we used the term vulnerability.
Who strive to make a living, and I lived with them, and I found that although this was a rice bowl where they were living, they had to struggle to get their daily meals and to survive in the midst of plenty. And this gave me a first impression of what vulnerability might be, although I had never heard this term before. And I went on doing my habilitation in the same region on petty food traders, how this distribution system worked. And when I finished my habilitation, I went to Africa to work in the refugee camps during the drought and famine crisis in Sudan. And all the time I was pondering about poverty issues, about underdevelopment, about dependency theories, and which really opened my mind to vulnerability was Amartya Sen's work on poverty and famine. And when I read his entitlement theory, I got the first idea of how to conceptualize what I had experienced over more than 10 years so far.
So right now, what I think we're doing in the framework of this academy and other events of this sort is looking at that, as Hans-Georg talks about, the coupling. Where does this bonding, this between nature and society, come together? What's the nature of this coupling? And David Harvey talks about it as the instantiation of society in nature. And what I think is important here is that the vulnerability is one of those concepts that resists strict and kind of definite formulation. There was a philosopher in the 1950s whose name now escapes me. It's in my computer somewhere. Who developed this idea of contested concepts. The idea is that art is a contested concept, liberty is a contested concept. Everybody has a different definition. Does that mean we shouldn't talk about art or liberty? Of course not. Well, I think vulnerability is one of those concepts that we strive to make more precise, to give it a more precise expression, but I think at some point we're going to have to say this can be contested, and that if you speak about it, you must specify the parameters that you're using for a specific circumstance. And what I see students doing here is trying to do that, trying to pull in those, okay, how can this concept in effect inform what I'm doing?
And for me now, social vulnerability is the way of how people are struggling for survival, struggling for security, struggling for basic needs in insecure environments, in insecure natural environments, and in insecure economic and political environments.
Concerning the Summer Academy, I think the most important thing is that the students make profit out of it, that they calibrate their brains, that they calibrate their thinking, and that they calibrate the value of their work, because they can peer review it with people from the same area, which is very important. They are not only in their own little box at their own university, but they can share it on a worldwide scale with different levels of people and different nationalities. That's important. And I think if in the end there starts to be a network, if they even can bundle research streams, then I would say that we have a huge success. Finally, it should not only be an academic exercise here, just to do some brain work, but one big thing should be how can we get this knowledge to policymakers on a local level and on the governmental level. Because if we don't get this knowledge into action through these policies, then we have failed.
Can we ask you a question?
I guess so.
You got it? Yeah. So are you a social, or would you consider yourself a social or a natural scientist?
I would say I'm somewhere in between at the moment.
Somewhere in between. And so, if you would say you'd be more on one side, are you using qualitative data or quantitative data?
Probably both.
Both. Okay.
Okay, well, I'm an economist, and so I actually feel more comfortable just critiquing my own field because I don't know so much about natural sciences. But in my own field, economics tries to model behavior of humans, and I feel like our modeling tools are not refined enough to capture the complexity of the kind of social systems that we're talking about. I think that that's a problem.
So this is a big problem of today, how to make the knowledge that people in the social sciences have usable in our engineering approaches. And this has not been resolved. I hope to get some answers to that from this particular conference. So this is the strength that we have today is the fact that we can really combine all these informations into concepts, and this combination has been made possible by means of modern technology like GIS and city planning and so on. That's geographical information systems, or that we have tools of systems analysis that we can use, and also you have other tools in social sciences that can be used to give us good numbers for our decision-making processes. You see that this meeting that we had right now is one where you could really say, here is an attempt, a model, so to speak, in which we try to get the two groups together. The only thing I'm complaining about is that the engineering input is not strong at this meeting here, but this could be done in the next time.
Okay, excellent.
Okay.
Yes, I think meetings like this, help a lot, because then you inform each other about what you do and how you do it. And I think it opens each other's eyes of what you could do. And I think it makes you understand each other better.
Really?
Mm-hmm. You don't think so?
Okay.
That there's a clear method to it.
But do you consider yourself as a social scientist or a natural scientist?
The interesting part is that in Germany you consider geography and natural science, and in the US you consider it as social science.
And what about yourself?
I think I'm exactly in the middle.
Right. Great. You're nice. You can be a bridge for disciplines.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
But I think it maybe shows that it's not necessarily to put a discipline into a corner, to say you're natural or social.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes maybe you're one, and sometimes you're maybe the other.
Okay.
So as an engineer, it's not always electrical or civil engineering. Sometimes it's engineering management, which is more qualitative, but it's still organized quantitatively.
So in your work, measurement is important for you in your work?
Always.
And what do you think might be the value of qualitative research in that? Could you describe how you might use that?
It's essential because qualitative feeds into the quantitative process. So before you can actually structure any sort of quantitative test or survey or method, you need to still have theories. You still need to have those tools that we talked about this week. But we don't stop at those tools. We don't stop at feeling comfortable that we have found some theory to explain some phenomenon and cause and effect relationship. Once we understand there may be a theory which explains cause and effect, we then want to come up with certain rules that are reliable. And if those rules can be tested in many, many locations, then we want to see them becoming laws. Once we have laws, whether they're laws of physics or laws of anything else, then we have a very high level of confidence that if we make some change to society or some change to the environment, then we are having a clear cause and effect relationship on vulnerability.
I have observed that when one tries to integrate social scientists with natural scientists in an epistemological debate, it means in a debate about methods and about conceptual background and methodology in general, it's pretty tough. There is almost no comprehension between the two, and this is really striking. This means actually that we still have a very narrow-minded education. Actually, we don't have an education that would put the basis of epistemology in the natural sciences, in the social scientists are very narrow-minded. They don't want to hear about natural sciences, not much at least, and they don't know it. And natural scientists are very often positivists still, even after the Heisenberg uncertainty and the quantum physics, and they still tend to be some kind of positivistic. Specifically, interdisciplinary attempts, they say interdisciplinary just does not work. Transdisciplinary either, pluridisciplinary either. What really works is hybridity. This is creative because this means to have an object of study which is at the crossroads of several disciplines. This doesn't mean putting together in the same basket people from different backgrounds, although it's a very rich experience. This means creating research objects that are at the crossroads of several disciplines like natural sciences, social sciences, and in themselves the object obliges to open our minds to other ways of thinking and to integrate them.
Okay. And I can answer in Spanish?
Well, that's actually what we're talking about. Would you prefer that?
Yeah.
You would prefer to speak in Spanish?
Yes.
But see, if we're in a meeting where the language is English,
yes,
then I can speak Spanish, but I can't speak English.
Yeah.
So how do you? This must be difficult for you then.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sí, porque como no manejo de manera amplia bien el idioma, entonces sí me cuesta más trabajo. Ayer que había que hacer el reporte de la presentación, bueno, creo que a veces es como 3-4 veces más trabajo que los demás.
Ja. Nou, en dat heb ik ook. Als ik in mijn taal spreek, dan begrijp je ook helemaal niet wat ik zeg.
Should repeat?
See, I don't speak Spanish.
Yes.
So
Pero the cameraman
the cameraman knew what you just said, but I don't. So,
yeah, but that's exactly the point.
And that's the point.
Okay.
So for us,
están referidas a un pequeño grupo que sí conoce directamente esa situación que vive mucha gente. Entonces, aquí la mayoría de los que están son de Europa.
You know, summarizing, I think he tried to explain to us that there's a lot of people in other countries who may not be available to speak in English, but they have beautiful examples about vulnerability, and we are not listening to them because they don't speak English, of course. No? And he's not an example, of course. He's not an example. He's just only here to tell us that point and to put it in evidence. So.
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
Good.
By Spanish, so at the beginning of our workshop, when I wanted to speak English, I thought Spanish. But I have to reactivate, like to switch in my mind. It's been a long time since I didn't practice English, so this was sort of a problem at the beginning. Now, is it an advantage? It's more, well, it can be an advantage if I compare to people that doesn't speak English, like some African people in my group, in my research group, that always needs translation, and they don't participate much because they're afraid and they don't really want to bother every time with translation. And
what's your point of view in that?
I know. I had to say, in this Western pattern of discussion, it's more fair, I think, and more open. But sometimes when I take part in some Chinese conference or workshop, it's quite difficult to get a chance to speak because you know I'm relatively young in that academic circle, so every time it's all the senior scientists, they have the first chance to speak in not only language but also culture.
I think it was biology flying by.
Boom, this report is handed and he walks off. And so this doesn't work.
We have still Günther on the list. Is there somebody more who wants to intervene? Great. So it's your turn.
You have different concepts. In the source paper, I just looked at global environment change community, climate change community, hazard community. So you cannot compare the concept of vulnerability of these three because each is different. And then within each community, if that is possible at the end, after the next talk. To link
how to present, how to bring the ball to the court of the policymaker. This is a policy relevant research which is unsolicited. It is, the numbers are not generated because Edinburgh or whatever
use. People's knowledge, local knowledge, has somehow been technified as ITC, no, ITK, you know, in the literature, ITK, indigenous technical knowledge. You know, now it's good, now it's good, now it's really solid because we call it ITK, right? It's people's knowledge, give me a break.
Could you please be a bit more serious?
A bit more serious.
We are
commercial.
No, actually, we are.
And the gute Schneiderweiße.
I don't know what
Oh, it's the Schneiderweiße.
Schneiderweiße.
Das trinken wir
We
hier.
are with the theoretical framework.
The theoretical framework.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Patrick, what do you have to say? Anybody got a comment? Finn, what do you think about social vulnerability? We need your opinion. How are you feeling? Are you vulnerable here?
Yeah, you're setting the stage for a good NASCAR party.
Definitely post. I think your sisters are going to ostracize you.
She's not post, it's post.
Your sisters are literally grinding their teeth looking at you.
Of women being hard hit by disasters and that whole issue of resilience and how we deal with women post-disaster and the rebuilding of societies and how that gender plays a role in the disaster context.
Or maybe what about man?
Well,
What is it about man in this context?
You know what? That would be really interesting because
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay, stop.
Okay, so I hear that, I don't know the exact numbers, but 2,000 people die in Katrina, major flooding events. And I hear that well, first I should say I'm an engineer, and so I'm interested in solving problems. I hear that 80% of those people who died are women, or I hear that 80% of those people who died are men. Right, I'm throwing a number out there. Laura said 75% in general are victims of disasters. To me, as an engineer, strictly in this context, it doesn't matter. It's 2,000 people died. And this is true in water resources.
Yeah, another anecdote.
Okay, here's another anecdote.
Another anecdote. When I not an anecdote. It's probably about gender issue. When I wanted to talk to people at the city of Heidelberg about the flood 2002, I introduced myself at the door and said, well, I want to talk about the flood. Usually the women opened the door, and then she yelled in the house that, Victor, there's somebody standing at the door and wants to talk about floods. I think it's your problem. And usually the man comes down and he conducts me to a room, closes the door, and we have a good conversation about floods. And at the end, the woman comes out of the door and she kind of, you feel that she would have had something to say, but she shakes her hand and says, goodbye, have a good time, but she didn't say anything.
Cool.
How many cases? Plenty.
Is it important for men to actually publish on this and be engaged in this? Because the notion that I have is that it's mostly women that address this question. Is that correct?
That's certainly my presumption, that this is better handled by the very competent women in our group than by me.
Better handled.
I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying that's my.
How do we prevent that from it not sounding patronizing? But I mean, clearly, men tend to dominate the discussion when they're in mixed company. I think it's a pattern that we can probably say is safe to assume. How do we prevent that natural reaction to let the women take care of this issue because they're best suited, and actually integrate men and make it a legitimate science for men to pursue? Because I suspect that's when it actually becomes mainstream thought.
I think that
it's not feminine to do that.
It's so good to hear.
Have a study like in Ethiopia, like that when the woman has like more power inside the household, they have a better position to decide how many children they want. Yeah, and also at the same time, there's a lot of studies like it's not related with disasters, but there's impacts like how you cope, which coping strategies you use for some event, and then, for example, you have some coping strategy or response that you could say unsustainable. For example, to pull out the child from the school, and when you have like households that conducted by women, the percentage of the children that are put out of the school are much lesser than when they are conducted by men.
Yes. Okay. Just to follow up the question on whether women are better suited to answer these questions, I guess I disagree with the idea that or should be the ones to look to on this. I think that they may be better suited, but I'm uncomfortable with excluding any viewpoints. Anyone could have a valid argument, valid viewpoint, regardless of what their gender is, and I think that can lead you down this tricky road where maybe I can't have viewpoints about Asia because I'm not Asian or something like this. Second point is that maybe if gender issues are only addressed by women, taking sort of a cynical view, then men will say, well, we don't get to talk in that field, so we're not going to really take these results as being valid.
There you go.
Oh, yeah, we're the males talking about gender issues.
Hoch überm Sternenzelt, breite deine Mantel aus, weit über unser Land. Und wenn ich mal Sorgen hab und mir die Hoffnung fehlt, Patrona Bavaria.
So, this has been a great day, but
I agree, actually.
Do
really
you?
Nice, yeah.
Well, let me film you for just 1 sec. Hey.
I really enjoyed today as well. We had great interviews, and I think it's time to relax a little bit now.
Yeah.
Let's go to the pool.
Oh, that's a great idea. Here, let's go down the hall. Oh my God, the door's open, ajar. Where?
Whose room is it, actually?
You know, this is Feroza's room. It's 246. That's where Feroz Verghese stays. Try again.
I think he's leaving. We should sneak in.
Oh, let's sneak in. Great idea.
Oh, he's dreaming.
He's dreaming? Oh my gosh.
Nicholas Blumen's traditional versus post-traditional societies. Oh, Ben Weisner. Theories. Social vulnerability. We need laws. We need laws. Oh.
That's good.
This is awesome.
And just, well, be careful in the middle of the night if somebody knocks your door. We are with a camera all the time. And just